Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I want to get to Benicio del Toro's Nightmare Alley. I saw this over several days, and it's been nominated for Best Picture. And I wanted to talk about what a nightmare that movie is, right? um, I got a few little clips and things, and I want to do this before I forget. But let's start here with Bob Saget. And it says autopsy reveals Bob Saget had multiple skull fractures prior to death. There's lots of headlines about this from Entertainment Tonight, from People. Bob Saget had catastrophic injuries to his head, was COVID positive when he died, the autopsy says, right? Medical examiner Bob Saget died from unseen blow to the head. And then here, Bob Saget autopsy reveals more tragedy. Multiple skull fractures found. So we'll read here from page 6 first, New York Post. Bob Saget suffered multiple fractures to his skull before tragic death in January, according to his autopsy report. They didn't release this right away, right? The late Full House actor's skull had several fractures along with abrasions to his scalp, according to the medical examiner's report obtained by page 6 on Thursday. The report also stated that Saget had bleeding and contusions to his brain, and that his death the result of blunt head trauma. So bleeding and contusions to the brain. So fractures of the skull means a broken skull, and then something hit him so hard that there was cracks in his skull, and because of that, the brain was traumatized, which it had contusions. The brain slopped up against the inside of his skull. So this is a severe blow to the head, right? Which we all knew, and now they're coming out with it. It is most probable that the decedent suffered an unwitnessed fall backwards and struck the posterior aspect of his head. The manner of his death is accident. Well, why is it most probable? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all, right? If you're going to say he hit his head so hard that he fractured his skull, right? And what they said later was they released a report that said that he thought it was nothing of it. He hit his head so hard that it fractured his skull, which would probably cause him to lose consciousness. His brain slapped against the inside of his skull and started to bleed. That would definitely wake you up, right? That would, and that he then crawled into bed and went to sleep with that kind of, a sustained blow to the head. I mean, what he slip in the shower? I mean, something like that, are they saying? Even that, though, I mean, what are they saying here? Like explain how this thing can be reality, right? Because it really can't. Okay, so I'm in the editing portion. I know what's coming up ahead. And People Magazine is going to talk about fractures around the orbital, around his eyes, right? The orbital bones, which was caused also by the blow to his head, back of his head. So there's lots of things here. But when they're saying it is most probable, that means they don't know. Which means if he did not have an accident, and they're not sure of it, that's what they're saying, that he had an accident, then there would have to be some other way that he got such a blow to his head that it fractured the back of his skull, caused his brain to bleed, and it's pretty severe as we go through this, right? Like I know what I'm about to read here. And so they're saying it's most probable, and I wanted to emphasize that. They don't know. And so they can't rule out foul play. They can't rule out that something other than what they think him had, like falling down and hitting his head severely. And, he was on some psychological medication. That's going to come out, too, as we go through this. But there could have been something else, right? They don't know. By saying probable, they're saying we're not sure, but this is our best guess, right? And so ruling out foul play then isn't, or some sort of, physical altercation or something. They don't know for sure, but they're pretty quick to say, oh, okay, let's seal this thing up. He fell and hit his head. That's our best guess. That's good enough for us, right? This is a big deal. Like Bob Saget has been covered now for over a month, and I'm eventually going to get to the autopsy myself. I'll find it and read it. Not today, because I have, like I said, I want to get to the Benicio del Toro, but there's a lot even just here in terms of the reports from these like entertainment magazines, right? Okay, so let's just get back to it here. The medical examiner also noted that Bob Saget's respiratory system was COVID positive, but did not clarify that finding. So he still had COVID. He was out there performing, and they have concluded that he accidentally hit the back of his head on something, thought nothing of it, and went to sleep. No drugs or alcohol were involved. Well, maybe he got hit in the head in a fight or something, where he was in the comedy club. He returned to his hotel room. I mean, why didn't he say anything to his wife or anybody that, he had that kind of a severe blow? He's not a tough guy, right? He's kind of a whiner and, self-obsessed. He loves to tell stories. He's an attention seeker. So he would say, oh my God, I just really hit my head, right? Like he didn't tell anybody. And so People magazine actually has a more extensive coverage of the autopsy, which I may look at tomorrow personally and cover it. I was waiting for this autopsy. I've talked about this. I had a Bob Saget cause of death, and they said it might take 6 months or something crazy like that to tell what the cause of death was. But I knew it was going to be something, right? I knew they weren't going to have some, to say he died in his sleep in a hotel room after, getting the you-know-what and then getting COVID, and there was going to be something, right? Like there had to be, something crazy here. I expected a crazy explanation, but not this crazy. And so it says here, per the report, the beloved Full House actor had a posterior scalp abrasions, subgeal hemorrhage, which is blood that forms between the skull and the scalp, discoloration in the upper and lower eyelids due to scalp fracture, subdural hematoma, which is the buildup of blood on the surface of the brain, subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is bleeding in the space that surrounds the brain. And so we'll listen to this in a second. I'm not sure. I haven't heard it yet. Bob Saget was also COVID-19 positive at the time of death, according to the autopsy. Though Saget did not have any illicit drugs or toxins in his system, the report stated that he was taking a prescription drug, clozapam, which treats seizures and panic disorder anxiety. So clozapam is like I believe there was a number of kids at one of my treatment centers I worked at that took clozapine, and some of them took clozapam, and I think they're both like elephant tranquilizers. Like, let's go ahead and look this thing up. But clonidine, like these kids would take these things so they could go to sleep, and many of them suffered night terrors, and the kid was like a zombie. Like they take the pill and then they would sleep for like 12 hours, right? Just some of these kids were hyperactive and just nightmares. The kids would suffer some sort of form of horrific abuse. And just to get them settled down, they gave them these different these clozapine, all these different drugs. I'm not sure which one does what, but one of them, I think all of them were very powerful drugs. Clozapine may increase the risk of serious or life-threatening breathing problems, sedition, or coma if used along with certain medications. I'm in the editing process, and the rooster just showed up. See if he'll crow again. Right while I'm, talking about this, editing this part of the video. Rooster, rooster, rooster. He just crowed a couple of times and has stopped. I don't know if he's going to crow again so you could hear him. But it's significant in some way, right? It must mean something. When the rooster shows up. Well, I guess he isn't going to crow again, but let's get back to it here. So here, a long warning about clozapam. It says here about the various things that it can do if mixed with the wrong other medications. It can be habit forming. Do not take a larger dose. Take it more often or for longer time than the doctor tells you. Clozapam may cause physical dependence. Here are the side effects: drowsiness, dizziness, unsteadiness, problems with coordination, difficult thinking or remembering, increased saliva, muscle joint pain, frequent urination, blurred vision, changes in sex drive or ability, rash, hives, swelling of eyes, lips, face, tongue, or throat, difficulty breathing or swallowing, hoarseness, and difficulty breathing. So some of these side effects might have played into it. I don't know. I mean, I can't say for sure, but they should, they're speculating on a lot of things here in the autopsy. They might want to just, mention that this could have an effect. There was a rooster. I don't know if the mic picked it up. Let's get back to the People magazine. This could put you in some sort of a daze, but I mean, this is also, you'd have to look at the medication as being something that contributed, and they're not saying that here, at least in terms of People magazine. Additionally, Saget's autopsy stated that he had cardiomyopathy, I don't know what that is, an enlarged heart, coronary artery, I'm not going to even try that word, damage or disease in the heart's major blood vessels, and aortic and a plaque buildup inside the wall of the aorta. So he had serious heart issues as well, enlarged heart and issues with his heart, which could be, who knows what kind of medications he'd been taking or whatever. And, there's other things that are causing heart problems right now, right? That he, so who knows what that's all about. And so the doctor said this, speaking about the fracture around Saget's eyes, the doctor said, the head hit something hard and the skull fractures in different places, including the orbits. So he had skull fractures around his orbits, but he hit the back of his head, right? The part of the skull around the eyes. And that caused bleeding through compresses the brain. The force of the hit on the head can also directly bruise and damage the brain. And so if there is such a severe force on the skull, again, the skull is hard for a reason. It's there to protect your brain. And so he got such a blunt force trauma to the head that either the force could have went through the skull and caused the brain to bleed. He hit the back of his head, but there was skull fractured around the orbits of his eyes. And so that's messed up. And then it could slosh around. That's what happens with a concussion, where, your brain is moving and it hits the side wall of your head in such a way that it, starts to bleed. And so he had he had blood in his brain, multiple skull fractures. He had COVID. He had an enlarged heart. He was on some sort of pain medication for, psychological, emotional issues. Not pain medication, psychological medication. The authorities have determined that Bob passed away from head trauma. They have concluded that he accidentally hit the back of his head on something, thought nothing of it, went to sleep. No drugs and alcohol were involved. Well, drugs were involved. He was on a medication that, maybe caused him to be, dizzy or clueless or whatever. I mean, these are medications of drowsiness, unsteadiness, problems with coordination, difficulty thinking or remembering. I mean, these are medications that put you in a daze, right? So I'm trying to find the autopsy, and I'm having trouble doing that. But I found this on CNN. I haven't watched the video yet. Autopsy report says Bob Saget had COVID-19 and died of a result of blunt head trauma. And so this is from the actual autopsy. And it says, it is my opinion that the death of Robert Saget, a 65-year-old white male, found unresponsive in his hotel room, is a result of blunt head trauma. And so first he says it's my opinion. So this isn't fact. This is going to be thought of as fact, but this is a guy's opinion. And then he says it is most probable. Now, probable isn't definite. Probable isn't even likely. It's probable. This is probable. It's most probable, right? That the descendant suffered an unwitnessed fall backwards and struck the posterior aspect of his head. The manner of death was an accident. And so, this is, again, I want to read the whole autopsy, but my opinion and probable mean that it's not factual, that there's speculation here, which means you can't rule out foul play or other things. Well, CNN has a video here as well, so let's see what they have to say.
Full House star Bob Saget's autopsy has been released by the medical examiner in Orange County, Florida. And per the report, the official cause of death is actually blunt head trauma. Joining us now is CNN chief medical correspondent and neurosurgeon, Dr. Saget Gupta. Sanjay, I think this was surprising to a lot of people. What does this autopsy report reveal?
I think what it reveals more than anything else is that this was not a sort of simple bump on the head.
No shit, right? This is what I said, and so many of us said. Doesn't make any sense, right? Now, Sanjay Gupta is a doctor. And like I've said about Fauci and these other people, they're legitimate doctors. They went to medical school and they've worked with patients. And so they're going to know more about this from an allopathic perspective than I am, right? They just will. Like, people know things when they work in a field. So they have more expertise in a field of, science and medical science. But in terms of interpretation of this autopsy, it doesn't seem, probable, and my opinion, and it just doesn't seem at all like it's accurate, right? It seems like, based on what they're saying here and the, blunt force trauma, that he had some bump in his head and he went to bed, and he never woke up, right? That was just, it's ridiculous. And you see that the ticker says, surprising discovery. Autopsy, Bob Saget died from blunt head trauma, raising questions about the legitimacy of the official story, right? Let's be honest here, because it doesn't add up. Like, it just doesn't add up.
I think a couple of days ago, what we had heard was that Mr. Saget may have bumped his head sort of as he was getting into bed at his hotel room, and that subsequently caused, a bleeding on his brain.
And you would have had to know then, he would have had to know then, that sounds like BS. He bumped his head and it caused his brain to bleed? Come on. Like, he hit his head on the wall or something, Oh, I bumped my head. Oh, it's no big deal. I'm going to sleep. Come on, right? Like, you knew. He knew. Like, just, just be honest for once, right? Like, if I know, you know. Like, they know more about this than me when he explained it, right? That there was, a severe blow to the head would only cause the kind of damage that they were talking about. And that was just the initial releasing of the statement. Now we know so much more. It's brutal that this guy would even buy into that story at first.
But when you read this autopsy report, that still may be the case, but it was a very significant blow to the head. I can show you, first of all, we put this graphic together just to give you an idea in yellow of all the various bones on his skull that were fractured.
Wow, look at all that, right? That's not a bump on the head. I mean, come on. Look at what all those bones were affected. Every one of those bones that you see there's fractures in some part of that. It's the whole skull was fractured, right? I mean, other than the top, the rest of the skull is compromised here.
It takes a lot of force to do that. And let me show you on the skull model if I can as well.
He's busting out the skull. Gupta's busted out the skull. Like, what is going on? He's got a skull in his hands. And I think it's a real skull. My son was saying it's hard for them to get these skeletons, even though there's so many people dying, for hospitals and medical examiners. But Gupta's busted out the skull. This can't be good.
Basically, there was fractures on the back of his head over here, and also abrasion over here. So clearly there was some sort of, impact over here. That fracture extended into the right temporal bone over here. So that was a hard blow to just do that. But what was also noted on the autopsy report was that there were skull fractures in the front of his skull over here as well.
Well, first of all, I'm kind of stunned because CNN is actually being useful to me here. I don't know how to deal with that, but CNN's actually shedding some light on reality here. I'm glad he busted out the skull. And so think about what he's saying here. The amount of trauma to this Bob Saget's head, that he just bumped his head and thought nothing of it and went to bed. Like, come on, his whole skull was compromised here.
Just above his eyes. So in order to do that, I mean, when I first saw this, if I knew nothing else about what had happened.
Gupta just dropped his skull. Let's listen to that again.
So in order to do that, I mean, when I first saw this, if I knew nothing else about what had happened, you would think that maybe this was someone who had fallen down the stairs and had several impacts to the head or been unrestrained in a car accident. I mean, it was that degree of force.
But if he had fallen down the stairs or was in a car accident, he would have broken, if he was unrestrained in a car accident or he fell down the stairs, he might have a broken arm or a broken wrist, or, he would have bumps and bruises all over his body, right? And so this is multiple blows to the head is what he's saying. You couldn't do this with one blow and not some bump. Like he's admitting that it's BS here.
In neurosurgery, you're often looking at the energy that's actually transferred to the skull and the brain, as well as the mechanism. And, whatever happened here, we may never know the exact, like how he fell or what happened.
Come on, Gupta. You did a good job. You busted out your skull, but come on, bro. You're saying we don't know how he fell? Like you're saying he definitely fell? We don't know if he fell or not. That's he's speculated. He said probably. We don't know if he fell. Nobody knows. Like you just said, we don't know what happened. We're never going to know what really happened to his head. And so you just don't want to call BS. This is the problem with the media. I mean, the two reporters are looking like, hey, this sounds like BS to me. Everybody hearing this, right? The autopsy, the doctor who did the autopsies, conclusions here sound ridiculous, right? Because he had what sounds like multiple blows to the head, and they were severe enough that, I mean, regardless of what kind of pain medication or psychological medication, clozapine or whatever he was on, these drugs, that he would have known that his head was messed up, right? Like if he was knocked out, sure. If he was knocked out, but they're like, he didn't, he crawled into bed. He's probably in his pajamas or something, right? And so, we don't know if he fell or not, right? Like there could have been someone got into his hotel room and, whacked him in the head with some kind of blunt, baseball bat or something like that, right? And then left. And, that's another logical explanation.
But it was a significant blow that caused that. And likely the bleeding on top of the brain, as you see there in this image, is likely causing pressure on the brain and subsequently, sadly, led to him becoming unconscious and then dying.
So I'm not going to get to the other part of the video I was going to make. I'm going to this went on longer than I thought, and I got a little bit more to say here. And so I'll hopefully get this Nightmare Alley done thing later today. I also have a video to make about Joe Rogan and some weird COVID stuff and things like that on my other channel, Apocalaughsnow today. So I got a lot of things to do. I want to get to a journey series too. I don't think I'll get to that all today. But anyways, if anybody can find the actual autopsy, please share it with me on my Instagram account, my Facebook account, or at poxofthefuture@gmail.com. I couldn't find it, and I don't really, have time to search for it today. And I can read through that, and if there's anything significant in the autopsy that they're not saying here, then I can present on a follow-up video tomorrow. But right now we know that this sounds like complete BS, right? Now, this can all be BS. Like, we don't trust the official stories anymore. So many people just don't trust the official story. And so what really happened here, we don't know. Like he might not even be dead. Like, we don't know. And so I don't think that's the case, but I'm just saying that, like, we never know it's just a sea of lies you have to comb through. And I know a lot of people want to attribute it to the you-know-what, and that may or may not be true. We simply don't know. But what they're saying to us doesn't make sense because he's using words like probably, in my opinion, and based in that, it's not factual. It's not, it doesn't add up that he fell. Like, what did he fall on in the hotel room that he fractured his skull in multiple places on the back of his head, but also all the way up to his orbital bones? Like, his skull was messed up and, not some sort of normal bump on the head type of scenario that we originally given. So when they come out and say bump on the head, and this speaks to his family, his wife, and all his friends, who, some of them must say, this doesn't make sense, right? These are Hollywood cynical people, and either they're paid off or whatever's going on here. They must, have compromised their own integrity here and not speaking out and saying, I'm calling BS on this thing. There's no way this happened, right? There's just no way that he got that kind of severe blow on his head. He put on his PJs, he jumped into bed and went to sleep without saying anything to anybody. When you get, imagine what it feels like to have the bones around your eyes fractured, right? Come on. Like, you think that feels good? You think that wouldn't, ring some bells or whatever? Like I said, I was on a zip line, and I should explain this. I was 14 years old. I had a friend who was like a year younger or something like that. And between us, we weighed like, I don't know, 150, 160, 170 pounds. I don't even know. I weighed under 100 pounds myself, right? And so behind my house, there was some land. There was an old farmer, my friend's grandfather, who owned all the land, and then they were started to build these, it was a sort of a rural community they turned into a suburb. And there was still some woods behind our house, that my friend's family owned. And we built some things out there. And, I was like 14 years old. So it was just like sort of the tail end of my childhood in the sense of, I was building a fort or whatever, right? And we built a platform in a tree that was about, 15, 20 feet high, the platform. We had to climb up. We had to build a ladder to climb up. And then above that, we put these like 2x10s that we nailed into the tree. And then we were going to put like walls and a roof. We never got to that part. And my friend said he had an old zip line, like a pulley, like was like a metal bar with a wheel on it. It was kind of rusty, and it was clearly not safe, right? And he got some wire, like he had a bunch of stuff, his grandfather, and so we didn't weigh enough and weren't strong enough to make the wire taut because it probably went 50 to 75 feet. It was a long line that we made, going from the top of the, if you stood on top of those boards, those 2x10s, we had to reach up to get to where the pulley was, right? And so we put the wire out, but there's a lot of slack in it, and it just wasn't safe. Like it was, and neither one of us wanted to go at first. My friend finally went, and I was like, well, if he went, I have to go. And so I went, and I landed over a creek, like it stopped, and I was a good 6 or 7 feet above the creek, and there's a bunch of stones, and when I jumped off, I sort of twisted my ankle. So the next time I went, I pushed off, and that caused the pulley to slip, and I woke up in the hospital. I fell about 25 to 30 feet and my head hit a rock. And there was no skull fracture, right? I mean, I was knocked out for 12 hours, and, I got a migraine headache yesterday. Like I've gotten migraine headaches since then, right? And so there was some damage there. I got a concussion, and I didn't fracture my skull, and I was not a full-grown man, right? So you understand, like from my own personal experience and other people who have had like, head injuries and things like this, to fracture your skull is significant, right? I mean, when you have, cracks in your skull, that takes something more than a bump to the head, right? And so they know, Saget Gupta knows, and all these other, people, the family, I mean, everyone's like, this doesn't make sense at all. It's really suspect. And so they're not calling BS. Like they're not, and they never will because it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you look at all the things that were said here. I'm not going to go through them again because you saw it, you heard it. It didn't make sense the first day, but now we see, when Saget Gupta holds up the skull and shows you that graphic of all the different places the skull was cracked, that there's like some other story here, and they're not saying. I mean, again, and this could be just some smoke screen because that's the way it works, right? And people will accept it and move on because, that's just the way it is. There's no truth in journalism anymore, and you really can't trust the official story. And people who don't trust the official story are just left wanting for the truth and then come up with their own explanations. A lot of times the explanations themselves are ridiculous, and that's what we live with right now. People trying to figure things out for themselves because the people that they're supposed to trust, the experts and the media and the government and all these people are completely compromised and are, just spreading misinformation on a daily basis. But it doesn't make any sense, right? There's a lot more here, and we know that this is BS. Like, what more can I say about it? And that's why I say, connecting to God is, to me, the only answer, because you're never going to get the truth out of a sea of lies, and the system's so fractured itself. The system's like Bob Saget's skull, right? Like, I mean, it's just, been compromised on so many different levels. The only way that a person can be have some peace of mind if they're conscious and have critical thinking skills is connect to God and just, accept that the system is, completely bankrupt and debauched and fraudulent and collapsing and all these things, right? It's a bad system. And there's just no integrity anymore, no morality. And there has to be a better way. Like there has to be something better that takes its place when it collapses. I mean, that's where we are. I say it all the time. The system can't be fixed, but we can connect to God, take everything as being from God and just accept the circumstances of our birth and move forward and help build something better. So again, I'll hopefully look into the autopsy myself, but I mean, there's not much more to say. I mean, it's already like, the thing's a joke now. I mean, you could see the way CNN reporters were looking at Gupta and the way Gupta's expression on his face, and they weren't buying it, but they don't want to call BS because they don't, it's just, it is what it is. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.